Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we are really diving deep into a conflict that's not just grabbing headlines. It's reshaping things in real time.
Absolutely. We're talking about the fast-moving situation between Israel and Iran.
Exactly. And this isn't abstract geopolitics, is it? I mean, for many, it's life and death. Mookie Tenenbaum, who's our guide through this, actually shared his insights on, get this, one of the coldest days of the year.
Yeah.
The very day Iran fired a missile that hit a hospital in Israel.
That's right. And our goal today really is to cut through all the noise, to look at the core facts Tenenbaum provides and try to understand the deeper forces at play here.
He offers such a unique perspective, doesn't he? Really gets into the details.
He does. It moves us beyond just the daily headlines, which are often heartbreaking, to grasp how we actually got here, and importantly, what might happen next for the region and, maybe the world.
Okay, so let's start unpacking it. It's so easy to get swept up in the minute-by-minute updates. But what Tenenbaum helps us do is zoom out. He gives us a framework to understand Iran's actual military situation. Its, surprising weaknesses, actually.
And the dangerous strategies it's adopted because of those weaknesses. The asymmetric stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Then we'll shift to Israel's response, which, Tenenbaum describes it as revolutionary, driven by AI.
Which is fascinating in itself.
Totally.
Yeah.
And finally, we'll look at what the future might hold. Some pretty startling predictions Tenenbaum makes about what could happen next.
So the first thing that really jumps out from Tenenbaum's analysis is how he challenges, the common idea of Iran's military strength.
Right, you see the numbers.
Exactly. On paper, you look at the raw number, 600,000 personnel in the army.
Which is huge. 4 times Israel's army, he says.
4 times. So you think, wow, formidable. But then Tenenbaum just sort of punctures that whole idea. He reveals the key detail. This huge army is using gear that's severely, almost unbelievably outdated.
It's a really powerful point, especially when he compares it to the Six-Day War. A lot of people might think, Israel dominated the air again, just like back then.
Yeah, that's the instinctive comparison. And Tenenbaum acknowledges, there's a surface similarity, Israel getting air superiority fast.
But he stresses the difference.
A crucial difference. In the Six-Day War, the Arab nations had comparable weapons, sometimes even better than Israel's at the time.
Right.
But this conflict, totally different ballgame, according to Tenenbaum. Iran's weapons aren't just a bit old. They're from a different technological era. Obsolete is maybe putting it mildly.
Like museum pieces, almost.
Pretty much. He gives examples, like the Air Force. They're still flying Phantom jets.
Phantoms from the 70s. Falklands. Malvinas era, he mentioned?
Right, exactly. 50 years old. These planes have none of the modern electronics, the avionics, the network stuff that defines air combat now.
So basically useless against modern jets.
That's what Tenenbaum argues. He says Iranian pilots often just escaped directly rather than even try to fight. Why? Because facing the Israeli Air Force, which he calls the best Air Force in the world with F-35s and all that.
They had no chance. That's what he said.
No chance. It's like bringing, a biplane to a dogfight with a stealth fighter. Just completely outmatched.
Okay, so the Air Force is basically a non-factor in a direct fight. What about ground troops? All those soldiers.
Well, that's another area where the reality is different from the numbers. Tenenbaum explains why ground armies are just useless in this specific scenario.
Because of the distance.
The sheer distance. Israel is 1,700 to 2,300 kilometers away from Iran.
Wow.
For Iran to use ground troops, they literally have to invade and conquer 2 other countries first just to get there.
Which is not going to happen.
It's not just hard, it's geopolitically impossible. Forget the logistics, which are insane anyway. Moving a huge army that far without air cover, no country would allow it. It's a complete non-starter for conventional war.
Okay, so Air Force out, ground troops out. What about defending their own airspace? Air defense.
Yeah. Also, surprisingly weak, according to Tenenbaum. He points to things like 1990s Chinese JY-10 batteries.
From the 90s.
Yeah. And the critical problem, the fatal flaw, he points out, is that these systems did not communicate with each other.
So they're not networked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Modern air defense is like an integrated system. A network.
Yeah.
Everything talks to everything else, coordinates responses. Think of it like an orchestra.
Right, playing together.
Iran's system. It's like individual musicians playing their own tune, totally unaware of the others. No automation, no real-time data sharing, and definitely no AI. He says, by far, no AI.
So huge gaps. Vulnerable.
Massive exploitable blind spots for anyone with sophisticated networked attack capabilities.
Which leads to the big question, right? Why? Why doesn't a country like Iran with these big ambitions have better weapons? They work with Russia, China. Surely they could get something better than 50-year-old jets.
You'd think so. But Tenenbaum's central explanation is stark. It's because of a long-standing, deliberate international boycott.
Not just Western sanctions.
No, that's the key. It's broader. He stresses that nobody wanted to give weapons to a government like the theocratic one in Iran. There's this deep global mistrust.
Even from countries like Russia and China.
Even from them. Tenenbaum puts it bluntly. Everyone knew not to give too much to these crazies. They just didn't trust the regime.
That's a powerful statement about how the regime is viewed internationally.
It really is. And he gives a telling example. The Bushehr nuclear plant.
Right.
Russia helped build it, supplies the uranium.
Right.
But, and this is crucial, all the spent fuel, the used uranium, has to be returned to Russia.
They take it back.
They take it back, which is highly unusual. It shows, as Tenenbaum says, Russia doesn't trust Iran with uranium. Even its supposed allies are wary about their nuclear intentions.
And this isolation, this mistrust, it links back to Iran's own rhetoric, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Tenenbaum mentions their stated goals destroying Israel, targeting the U.S. and the West, this kind of extreme ideology. That's why neither China fully trusts them, he argues.
So they're really boxed in.
Pretty much. The only country Tenenbaum mentions providing any limited military supplies is North Korea, which, says a lot about their options. Desperate partners for desperate regimes.
Okay, so conventional military, weak, outdated, isolated. So how do they project power? How do they fight back?
That's where the pivot comes in. Out of necessity, Tenenbaum explains, Iran shifted to asymmetric warfare. It became their survival strategy.
Okay, and what does that look like?
Pillar number 1, according to Tenenbaum, is a global terrorism system. Since they can't win a conventional war, they use proxies and terror networks.
Like Hezbollah and Hamas.
Exactly. He highlights Iran's role in arming, funding, supporting them. They're not just allies, they're extensions of Iranian strategy.
And he mentioned specific examples, like in Argentina?
Yeah, the 2 huge attacks in the 90s, the Israeli embassy bombing, the AMA bombing in Buenos Aires, horrific events.
85 people killed in the AMIA bombing alone.
Devastating. And Tenenbaum even suggests possible Iranian links to the death of Nisman, the prosecutor investigating AMIA. He says Iran is in the business of spoiling the party.
Creating chaos, instability.
Projecting influence indirectly through terror and disruption without risking their own weak conventional forces. Plausible deniability, constant low-level conflict.
Okay, so terrorism is one pillar. What else?
The second weapon is their missile program. Tenenbaum says it's largely based on North Korean tech, maybe some Chinese input too.
And the goal isn't necessarily military victory with these.
Not primarily. The main goal, as Tenenbaum puts it, is psychological. To have everyone terrified with their missiles.
Deterrence through fear.
Exactly. Make up for conventional weakness by creating anxiety, forcing enemies to spend resources on defense, live under that threat.
And the third weapon. The most dangerous one.
The nuclear program, the pursuit of atomic weapons. Tenenbaum sees this as the ultimate survival strategy for the regime.
To become invulnerable.
That's the idea. He mentions his previous point about nuclear states. Countries with atomic bombs don't lose wars. That seems to be the calculation.
And he thinks they'd actually use one.
That's the chilling part. Tenenbaum's assessment is stark. He says they would because they're crazy and don't care about the consequences. It's a terrifying prospect, suggesting a regime that might not be deterred by traditional logic.
Wow. And this links back to the hospital tech you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Tenenbaum was clear that wasn't an accident.
Not at all. He states flatly, this missile is not by error, deliberate targeting. And he goes into detail about the type of missile used.
The divisible one.
Yes, this special divisible missile. A concept, he notes, borrowed from nuclear warhead delivery multiple payloads.
So how does it work?
Imagine the main missile has a belt of maybe 20 smaller mini-missiles attached. As it nears the target, it releases them.
And they scatter.
Each goes in a different direction. The idea is to cause much greater damage over a wider area. More chaos, harder to defend against completely.
He said they're made in Iran.
Yeah, which shows some domestic capability. But he also pointed out that in that specific hospital attack, only 2 of the 20 exploded.
So a 90% failure rate for the mini-missiles.
Which reinforces his point that Iran is not a technological pole. They can build things, but the quality control, the reliability, It's maybe not always there. Still, the intent behind using such a weapon against a hospital is unmistakable.
And the human cost. Sending mothers home from the hospital just 12 hours after giving birth.
It's horrific, a direct consequence, Tenenbaum explains, of this deliberate targeting of civilian sites, just trying to minimize casualties from these kinds of attacks. It shows how this asymmetric strategy hits ordinary people.
Okay, so that paints a grim picture of Iran's capabilities and tactics.
Right.
Let's pivot to Israel's response. Tenenbaum called it revolutionary.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. He makes this huge claim. This conflict marks the first time artificial intelligence had a preponderant role.
Not just helping, but dominating.
Dominating. In planning, execution, the decisiveness Israel showed. He even puts a date on it. June 2025, marking this historic shift.
What does that mean practically? AI dominating warfare.
It implies AI was deeply involved in selecting targets, adjusting tactics on the fly, predicting enemy moves, coordinating complex operations, a whole different level of warfare.
And this helped them get control of the skies so quickly.
It was a critical factor, along with Iran's weak air defenses, yeah.
Yeah.
But beyond air power, Tenenbaum emphasizes Israel's intelligence mastery, especially Mossad.
Right, the spy thriller stuff.
Exactly. He reveals Mossad agents were inside Iran for a year and a half just for this operation, probably longer for general intel.
And they smuggled in drones, disassembled. Over 1,700 kilometers.
It sounds incredible, doesn't it? The planning, the networks, the sheer guts involved in moving that kind of gear, piece by piece, right under their noses.
Unbelievable.
And the intel they gathered was incredibly specific, targeting nuclear scientists, who they are, where they live, their routines.
Which enabled that first big strike.
Yes, the one aimed at taking out, 20 of the most important people in the Iranian army and 7 or 10 key figures in the nuclear project. All in one go. Surgical.
And he mentioned this isn't new, citing the killing of that Hamas leader Khan deep inside Tehran.
Right. It fits a pattern of precision, high-value targeting. But the technology used this time seems like a leap forward.
How so?
Well, Tenenbaum says Mossad painted the missile locations, somehow marked them precisely for Israeli satellites and drones to find.
Yeah.
But the truly mind-blowing part is his claim about missiles with facial recognition.
Facial recognition on a missile.
Yeah. A system where the missile or its targeting system literally recognizes the target's face before striking. Recognize the face and then kill him, as Tenenbaum put it.
That is staggering. Moving beyond just hitting a location.
Exactly. And then there's the use of building blueprints.
To target individuals within a building.
Yes, to kill specific targets without killing other people in the same place. Tenenbaum calls it surgical work. It implies knowing exactly where someone is inside a structure and tailoring the strike to minimize collateral damage to an incredible degree.
Stuff you only see in movies, usually.
Pretty much. And then there's the logistics of getting the planes there, mid-air refueling.
Right, over Syria now, he said.
Yeah, developing that capability, apparently now possible over Syrian airspace, was crucial for these long-range strikes. It changes the whole operational map.
And U.S. coordination was key, too, helping stop Iranian missiles.
Tenenbaum explicitly mentioned coordination with the Americans to stop part of the missiles. So real-time defense partnership, intelligence sharing, maybe integrated systems at play.
But then came the tactic Tenenbaum called fabulous, the really wild one.
Ah, yes, the deepfake tactic. He says Israel used artificial intelligence, apparently with deepfake, to impersonate high-ranking Iranian commanders.
Making them think their own chief was calling an urgent meeting.
Exactly. A highly convincing AI-generated deception, luring all the heads of the Air Force, and later the Secret Service, into gathering in one specific, supposedly secret bunker.
Oh my God.
And once they were all there, Israel struck from the air, destroyed the place, and killed them all together.
And he said this happened multiple times.
3 or 4 times already, Tenenbaum claims, even hitting locations theoretically unknown to anyone else. It's a paradigm shift using AI for psychological warfare and mass decapitation strikes.
Just incredible. So Iran, weak, asymmetric, Israel, AI-powered, surgical, highly effective defense.
That's the picture Tenenbaum paints. On defense, he gives stunning numbers. 100% effectiveness against drones. Not a single one got through to cause damage.
Perfect score against drones. Amazing. What about ballistic missiles?
Those are much harder, but he says effectiveness was 85 to 90%.
Which is incredibly high for ballistic missiles.
So high, he calls it 110% in military terms because it's so difficult. It points to that layered defense system Iron Dome, David Sling era working incredibly well.
Plus the civilian shelters, the blindados.
Right, the armored rooms and homes, which he says drastically cut fatalities, except for one case of a direct hit. It's a combination of high-tech defense and practical civil defense.
And meanwhile, Iran is getting more isolated.
That's a key theme in Tenenbaum's analysis. The famous axis of evil is shrinking, he says, and then very bluntly, Iran has no friends, and it's not a coincidence.
Their ideology, their actions have alienated almost everyone.
Pretty much. He talks about their proxies being neutralized. Hamas has disappeared, militarily speaking. Hezbollah is terrified, don't shoot, don't talk.
Paralyzed.
Seems like it. Even Syria, their traditional ally, Tenenbaum says, is secretly delighted Israel is hitting Iranian influence there because of old resentments.
So who's left? Just the irrelevant countries, as Tenenbaum puts it. Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. No real strategic help there.
What about the big players? China, Russia? Weren't they supposed allies? Tenenbaum offers a pretty critical view. China, he says, is busy looking in the mirror, projecting this epic image, but its military is probably not as good as it wants to say.
Doubts about their actual capabilities.
Yeah, and he slams their economy too, calling it cardboard. He tells that story about bankruptcies being banned.
Right, 14 bankruptcies last year. Only one this year because they were prohibited to hide the problem.
Exactly. Suggests deep internal fragility. And Russia. Bogged down in Ukraine, resources drained.
And he mentioned that Trump called to Putin, telling him to mediate with Ukraine instead.
Yeah, Tenenbaum uses that to show the institutional weakness in both countries. The bottom line, neither China nor Russia came to rescue Iran. They have their own problems, and they don't fully trust Iran anyway.
So Iran is basically alone, facing an AI-powered, highly capable adversary. Where does this go? What happens next?
Tenenbaum looks at potential paths. One involves a potential future decision, maybe by someone like Trump targeting the Fordo bunker.
The underground nuclear facility.
The heart of the program, yeah. 70, 80 meters under a very strong mountain, full of centrifuges. Tenenbaum says destroying it needs an American bomb with an American bomber. Specialized bunker busters the U.S. has.
What about just targeting the leadership? Israel seems good at that.
They are. Tenenbaum says Israel finds them in 2 minutes and can liquidate them. But he questions if that's the best strategy.
Why not?
Well, maybe killing the current elderly leader is less effective than leaving him hysterical, making bad decisions. It's that psychological warfare angle again. Maybe a flailing leader weakens the regime more than a martyr does.
Interesting point. But escalation has huge risks, right? The Strait of Hormuz.
Massive risks. Closing Hormuz. A huge disaster, Tenenbaum calls it. All that oil from the Gulf cut off. Prices would skyrocket globally.
Plus attacks on U.S. bases.
A very real possibility which would pull the U.S. directly in.
But the U.S. doesn't want that.
Tenenbaum thinks the U.S. does not want to get into a mess it doesn't want to be in. They're hesitant after Iraq, Afghanistan, and pulling back from Ukraine. That U.S. reluctance is a major factor.
So if the regime did fall somehow, what happens inside Iran? Chaos like Libya or Syria?
Tenenbaum thinks not. He argues Iran being mostly a single ethnicity makes anarchy less likely than in places with deep sectarian divides.
But there's the Qom problem.
Right, the city with 20,000 clerics, the ideological core near Tehran. You can't just bomb them, they're civilians.
So the system itself is resilient.
That's his point. The underlying structures, judiciary, parliament, military cadres would likely remain. He uses the analogy of Berlin police after WWII just swapping Nazi symbols for communist ones. The system adapts. He thinks this will happen in Iran, too.
So with all this, any chance of a ceasefire, a negotiated truce?
Tenenbaum is incredibly blunt here. No, there will be no ceasefire.
None.
And he sees only 2 outcomes, which are basically the same. An agreement where Iran basically surrenders, or an agreement where Iran basically surrenders.
Wow, that's stark. Capitulation is the only end.
That's his reading. He compares it to Nazi Germany. Surrender seemed impossible, but it happened. Iranian bravado, he says, is of no importance against overwhelming force.
So ignore the public statements. Surrender is not in our dictionary, or calling leaders Hitler.
He suggests the rhetoric doesn't match the strategic reality. He notes Israeli statements, while sometimes strong, are much more limited in impact compared to Iran's ideological declarations, but ultimately actions speak louder.
And the Israeli public. How are they reacting?
Tenenbaum reports massive unity, 90% support for the government during the crisis, even from anti-government groups.
Rallying around the flag effect.
Exactly. But he cautions it's temporary. This unrestricted support lasts while the threat is immediate, once things calm down.
back to 2 Jews, 3 synagogues.
That's the expectation. The deep political divisions in Israel will likely resurface quickly once the immediate crisis passes.
This has been just an absolutely fascinating deep dive. The asymmetry, the AI, the fragility of Iran's position that Tenenbaum lays out.
Yeah.
It's incredibly complex.
It really is. And Tenenbaum doesn't shy away from looking just ahead. He offers some futurology, some possibilities for the very near term.
Like what?
He thinks things could move fast. Maybe a U.S. strike on Fordo. Maybe Iran just surrenders under the pressure. Or, interestingly, an internal coup.
A coup within Iran.
Yeah, parts of the army or regime insiders getting scared, seeing it's hopeless, and trying to overthrow the hardliners for, perhaps, amnesty.
And if any of that happens.
The prediction is missile launches stop, Israel stops bombing, but only if Iran gives up its fissionable material, its nuclear path is halted.
And he thinks something has to change soon.
He says he would be very surprised if the situation just stays as it is. The dynamic is too intense, the pressure too high. The status quo seems unsustainable in his view.
So, as we wrap up, there's so much to think about. The role of AI in war. It's truly terrifying, isn't it?
It's a huge takeaway.
Yeah.
And also, those lessons from history, Tenenbaum mentions how quickly seemingly strong regimes can crumble. Understanding these deeper currents, the ones Tenenbaum points to, that's how you stay truly informed beyond the headlines.
It's this strange mix, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ancient conflicts, old hatreds, but fought with technology that feels like it's from the future.
Exactly. And the implications of that convergence, AI, cyber warfare precision, strikes alongside deep ideological divides. That's something for all of us, for you listening, to really mull over. What does this tell us about where conflict is heading in the 21st century? A lot to consider.